to Up
for
Review,
the darkest and grittiest furry review podcast
on the web.
Okay, so this is Up for Review. Do we want to dive into, what do we want to dive into first? Describing the podcast or describing ourselves?
I kind of like the sultry voice you there. So this is Up for Review.
Totally keep that. No, I can't promise it's going to happen every time, but yeah, no, totally keep that. So seriously, describe podcast first or us?
We should probably introduce the podcast first.
Since you're the one who kind of corralled, cajoled, talked us into doing this, why don't you explain what we're doing, what we're here to do today?
Okay, so at Up for Review, what we would like to do is do monthly episodes of reviews of furry literature. This time, we actually have up Inhuman Acts, edited by Ocean Tigrox. It was a really fun read. We're looking forward to getting into that. Also, kind of a thing that just kind of happened was we got to interview one of the esteemed authors in this series. So we kind of came up with the idea to do not only reviews, but interviews of editors and authors. So our plan schedule is to do a review a month, and then 2 weeks later do the interview episode.
When we're able to.
Yes.
Because unfortunately, as much as I would love to be able to do an interview every time, I just think sometimes it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's, unfortunately, life gets in the way of things sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So who are you people again?
We go into our author credentials now?
So why not? I don't think we've actually said our names yet, so I think it may be good to do us in the credentials.
I'm just some Moogle.
Just some Moogle? No name or anything?
Just doing Moogle things.
Oh, okay. Biting knees, bring stories.
Yes, I think we should bug JD and get him to go first.
Okay.
Alright. Okay, so I am JD. I am a Dragonox. I have been published in Heat 15 from Sofa Wolf Press, in Species Foxes by Thurston Howell Publications, and in Fang 8 by Furplanet. What about you?
My name's TJ Mind. I'm a writer. I have been published in Sofa Wolf's Heat 15 with The Promise, in Rabbit Valley's Free Trash with Learning Curve, and with Furplanet's upcoming Fang 9 with my story Firsts. Mostly I focus on slice of life and contemporary romance-y type things. Sometimes it's erotica, sometimes it's not. And for our third host, who are you, Moogle person?
Hi, I'm Mog. I'm a Moogle. I do Moogle things. Like cajole and corral rats and dragonoxes into podcasts.
Oh, that's the thing I forgot.
Oh, the species? That's okay. I mentioned it. We're good.
Yeah, but you mentioned it, but I didn't mention I bark sometimes and confuse people. It's fun. I actually kind of let out, at work, I let out a really loud surprise yelp at one point, and I think I turned a number of heads and got very weird stares. But that's because I'm a weird furry person, and I do furry things in non-furry circles sometimes. So, Jay, I believe you had a well-thought-out and planned introduction to what we're here to review today.
Well, I haven't actually done my credentials.
Ah, you haven't done your credentials. Ignore me.
Ignoring. So I've been published in Heat 14 with a poem that won the 2018 Leo Literary Award. I can't poem, so don't ask me about it. And my first publication was actually in 2015 in Fragments of Life's Heart by Weasel Press, with my story Transitions there. Particularly proud of that one. And I also have something upcoming in the next Fang, which is a story that I am very proud of, but the editor kind of forced me to make it good. So, yeah.
Darn that Ash for doing his job so well.
I know, right?
Yes. He saw the knife in the distance. He said, no, bring that closer and put it right at the heart and then twist. There you go. That's your story.
And that's pretty much verbatim what he said, yes.
Mm-hmm. So, Jay, I believe you had a wonderful little intro for what we're here to review today set up for us.
Yes, up for review today, we have Inhuman Acts, a collection of noir, edited by Ocean Tigrox, who you may know from his podcast, Fangs and Fonts. The anthology is published by Furplanet in 2015, so look for it at their table if you happen to be at a con they're dealing at. You can also find it on furplanet.com or at baddogbooks.com if ebooks are more your speed. Just look for the wonderfully atmospheric cover by Salin, with portraits of characters from 3 of the stories. Well, It feels like the best place to begin digging into this is to ask, what is noir? For me, this was kind of a tricky question. After reading IA, what do you guys think noir is?
Wow, that is a good question. I actually had to do quite a bit of research because, like you two, I was writing for Inhuman Acts too. So I looked into noir, and it's, from what I gathered, it's very easy to cross into like hard-boiled from a noir story. Mm-hmm. But the basic elements I gathered was that it needs to be dark, hence noir. It needs to contain certain elements like a femme fatale, which not all stories in Inhuman Acts did.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say it needs. It's just that's one of the signature tropes of the genre.
Of the genre, yeah, for sure. It's one that I particularly like. I do like the femme fatale stories.
Mm-hmm. Maybe Ocean will like mine.
And what else does it need?
Honestly, more gray morals. Lots and lots of gray morals are one of the big things I found in this collection.
Yes, I totally agree with that. Most of the heroes come off more as anti-heroes, which is something I really enjoy.
Yeah, kind of the notes that I made are noir is gritty. You show the world in grays. As you mentioned, even the good guys do bad things. One of the big things is that there's no real, truly positive outcome because the world is in gray.
I'll be completely honest, before I actually read this collection, this actually, I knew I wanted to write for the sequel for Inhuman Acts. I actually had a story idea. I'm like, oh, that sounds so morally ambiguous. It would go fabulously in this collection. But this was actually my first time reading it. Because leading up to this, most of my noir exposure has been through such heavy-handed tropes, it's actually more parody. I actually remember expressly the episode of Fairly Odd Parents, where it was a noir episode in black and white with all the grittiness and tongue-in-cheek type tropes scattered throughout. It was fun, but going off tropes and playing with them is a little bit different than actually trying to write something serious. So going through this collection was a lot of fun, especially when I read one story, wrote mine, and then finished the anthology. It was kind of like, did I do this right? I think I did this right. I hope I did this right.
That's something I noticed with my Inhuman Acts 2 story was I think I captured a fairly basic noir feel, but reading through Inhuman Acts, I felt like that there was a lot of things I could have done better. And I hope I get accepted because I want to work with Ocean to make the story that I wrote even better, even more noir. Even if I get a rejection, that's going to be my goal with the story, is make it even more noir, give it more of that atmospheric feel. Because I think another thing that really defines noir is the atmosphere.
Yeah, one of the things that I noticed, especially in Inhuman Acts, is that this collection kind of stayed relatively close to some of the noir tropes. Specifically, the wash-up, disillusioned detective trope. That one was very prevalent in this anthology.
Mm-hmm. One thing I'll also say that kind of surprised me a little bit is that this was a very mature anthology. And I'll own I haven't read too many, hence part of the reason I'm doing this podcast. But it seems like a lot of if it's a general audience anthology or if it doesn't include sex, it is just that, general audience. I personally would say that this is not for... This at least requires some parental guidance, just because it has that... It's very dark and very gritty, and sometimes it's graphic with a few different aspects of it.
Yeah, definitely. There were some graphic stories. The opening story by Giannis comes to mind. That was a particularly graphic introduction, yeah.
Yeah. There was a lot of that, and in fact, one of the things that I came up with as something that I saw over and over again is what I've been calling the "that's fucked up" test. Because in every one of these stories, you'll hit something that will just make you go, "That's fucked up." So yes, this is definitely for more mature readers with a little bit of parental guidance.
That might be one of the defining aspects of noir, though. I mean, the whole plot twist of something, the shock factor, I guess you would call it.
So, with that being said, though, how engaging was this anthology as a whole?
Well, I think that silence speaks for itself right there.
I would disagree wholeheartedly.
I guess I'll start. I would say fairly engaged. We said, it stayed fairly close to that disillusioned detective trope. So I was fairly engaged, except, as we went on, looking back, I was like, okay, which private investigator was this again? So aside from that element, which, it is what it is, I would say I stayed fairly engaged. The advice I got from the editor when he heard we were going to tackle this, and me personally not being a big fan of dark and gritty stories as a whole, was to just take them one at a time, set the book down, walk away, and then come back and read the next one. So that's how I approached it.
Bouncing off that exact same that last sentiment, that speaks to me so very much with this anthology. It wasn't actually until I got into the fandom that I read collections of short stories that weren't by one author. And usually, even in the fandom, I was able to go ahead, read a story, keep going on the next, and the next, and the next. This anthology, by the end of every story, I had to pause. I had to put the book down and breathe and register what I just read, because, wow.
See, and I'm pretty emotionless, I guess, because I can just read through the stories. It's very rare that I read a story that impacts me so much that I actually have to take a break. The only one that I can really call is a novel by Jason Tyler, where there was a scene where the two protagonists, one of them is essentially sexually assaulted, and the other one just kind of has to listen to this person who's essentially his lover enduring this. But other than that, I mean, I can totally grant people taking a break from noir stories in this collection. Like, some of them are pretty graphic. Some of them, it is like, whoa, that, as JD said, that was fucked up. That was fucked up factor was pretty high. Me personally, I found it fairly engaging, and I could just read through the stories. But that's me. I'm weird.
Did any specifically jump out to
Yes,
either of you?
there was very much a story in this that I almost noped the fuck out on the entire thing. That was Every Breath Closer by Slipwolf. That story specifically almost made me walk away from the entire collection.
Yeah, and in Slip's typical fashion, I mean, I haven't read anything of Slip's that doesn't just jump out at me as being exceptionally well written, something you can get really engaged with, so I could definitely see that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, with his story I was pulled throughout, just wondering where it was going to go. And especially the way it was done. They were just it's the way it starts in media res, making you wonder where is it going, and the way scenes jump and the reason for their jumps because the characters' sobriety makes the story that much more interesting to me.
Yeah, and on a more personal note, his MacGuffin, that's all I'll say about it, is he hit one of my personal phobia buttons pretty hard, which is why I almost noped the fuck out.
I know for me, I think the story that really kept me engaged was, on so many different levels, was Vermin's Vice. Personally, this is my favorite story of the collection. But it's also because at this point in the anthology, I think it's somewhere like 3/4 the way through, I started to really get a handle as to what noir was. It was one of those things where I started looking for, okay, where's the grayness? Where's the moral quandary coming from? And there are so many potential opportunities that come up in that story. It was really, really neat trying to figure out what was going to happen, how it was going to work, especially the way the story started. I felt that the way it starts, it hints that there's a secret to be learned, both about the main characters, our rat and our mouse, and the club itself. And it just was really, really neat and so intriguing the whole way through.
Yeah, and actually one of the ones that engaged me the most was actually Muskrat Blues, which makes sense since it's the first story in the collection. It's kind of the one that I looked at as kind of introducing what noir was.
Mm-hmm.
So that one was fairly engaging, and it was an interesting mystery as well.
I would agree with that. I think Ocean did a really good job picking the opening story for that. Giannis did a really good job with his setup. basically introducing us to the anthology.
I agree with Muskrat Blues. It was, as I've heard editors say, you start an anthology with the tone you want to set. And Muskrat Blues does that so well. It hits those notes that people would think is noir. So it's one of those things I feel was a glove, a well-worn glove, and it just was nice to sink into this and like, yes, this is noir. This is what I was expecting, and it was very, very welcome.
Another one that I found really engaging was right at the halfway mark, case file 007, A Blacker Dog by Husketeer. That one really engaged me well, and honestly was the reason I bought this collection in the first place, because it's based on the old legends of the black dog, which everyone has, and you only see right before you die because it's supposed to take you to the afterlife. So that one engaged me personally as kind of a folklorist. I was really interested to see what Husketeer did with that old legend, and that one was a really good story.
The ending made me sad.
I believe that's noir.
I have comments on that story, but they'll come up later in the podcast. Did you have any other titles that stood out to you, Mog?
To me in particular, it's hard to really nail one down.
I don't have one, I have 4.
Okay, so the ones that stood out to me in particular, definitely the opening, Muskrat Blues. I really liked Fixer. Ghosts, for sure. I could just go down the list. There was a lot of them that was just... It's hard to pick one in particular, because a lot of them did really jump out at me.
I will say that Ghosts happens to be the story where I started noticing that's fucked up.
So one thing that I feel can make a story really engaging is its setting. Are there any that stood out to you specifically?
Well, one that stood out to me was your favorite, Vermin's Vice. And for me, that story was all about the locations having personality.
Oh god, that bar. Yes. I'm so happy it wasn't me who said it, because I didn't want to say Vermin's Vice, because I could probably say Vermin's Vice every single time.
Yeah, but you had Vermin's Vice, the bar, and then you had the Mouse's house, and you had the Rat District, and they all felt very distinct and places that had personality and meant different things.
One that actually really stood out to me, interestingly, was Crimson on Copper by Tony Gray Fox. Partially because it was my first exposure to diesel punk as a genre. Something I've just never experienced, and that was kind of neat in and of itself. I also wanted to see more of that story, just so I can get more of that world and see how it worked.
Well, I actually liked the setting in Danger in the Lumo Bay by Mary Loud. Mm-hmm. I think the setting was very, very unique for a noir story. And I really liked the setting in Fixer, too. Who doesn't like a noir in like a Miami Beach type setting?
Mm-hmm.
One setting that really stood out to me was Scorned by Casey Alpinus. For that one, we'll come back to it later, obviously, but for me, dialogue was a real way to establish a setting.
Oh, yeah.
And that really jumped out at me as creating this 1920s, 1930s setting through dialogue.
Carrie's actually really good with the historical stuff, as I recall. I've read some other stuff that was kind of... I think she actually is a kind of a history buff, too, which, I know JD and I are.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any other settings or worlds that jumped out at us?
You mentioned earlier, Jay, with your engagement of the Blacker Dog by Husketeer, the idea of that lore, that folklore brought in to this current setting, that made it super interesting. That element of world building of everyone has their black dog, that made it really, really neat to me, and certainly something I haven't seen before. So I thought that as a world building element was really, really fantastic, and something I almost want to see more of in and of itself.
I believe we touched on that with Husketeer in our interview, asking her to, hey, can you write more of this? Because we'd like to see more.
Yes, please. Yes. It
was quite good.
Such a quaint little story.
Quite quaint.
So one of the more important aspects of the setting is actually the characters in the noir story. and the characters can really help add to that setting. There was a lot of really good characters.
And Mog's doing a great impersonation of one right now.
Several, I think.
It was a dark and stormy night.
You know what? I'll take that over the snow and cold we've been having. So yes, please bring it on.
A lot of the characters smoked, except for the ones that didn't. Husketeer. No, Husketeer's character, the black dog that chewed on jerky sticks instead of smoking cigarettes, that was hilarious. And hearing her actually describe that was amazing.
You know, that was fantastic for Hunter. I enjoyed that a lot. Not to mention just their general the general banter that John and Hunter had, the relationship, like they were clearly like a couple that wasn't a couple, but they had that lifelong friendship for obvious reasons. It was so much fun just seeing them go back and forth.
Yeah, Blacker Dog was one of the stories that really stood out for me for its character work. Not just the ones you mentioned already, but all the black dogs had different personality quirks to them. And that was really neat to see as well.
There were several authors that did a lot of really interesting things with the characters, and very specific things too. You know, Giannis's use of the pig that smelled around the crime scene. That really stuck out to me quite a lot, because a lot of people just don't know pigs actually have a very keen sense of smell, and it is on par with like bloodhounds.
That's one of those facts that I keep forgetting about until I remember it. Like, someone reminds me like this, I'm like, oh right, that is a thing.
Yeah, and also in that story where he thought best in a mud wallow.
Yeah, very good character. I mean, Husketeer, good character. Slip always does great characters. So,
Actually, I think one of my favorite characters in this story, just from a who they are point, is Captain Jacques from Danger in the Lumo Bay. The fact that this captain of the ship, the kind of person that is always the good guy who is the moral compass, going out of his way to choose the potentially not best option. It's like, dude, why are you playing the dark side character in a Star Wars game? This feels weird. But also, I thought that was really unique and interesting for a character like that. It's like the fact he's making these dark and gritty choices, and you can see him doing so. It's like, that's really, really neat.
I feel like I should add in here that in Knights of the Old Republic, my characters, light side or dark side, are either named Darth Mog or Mog Mughal.
Oh my god. I'm halfway done with you, but I can't be because we're only a third of the way through this podcast. I would also plug the thing that I love about the characters in Vermin Vice, but I can't because spoilers. But yes. My notes great in one draft says OMG, and then yes.
Another story that I thought had a lot of did interesting things with the characters was Guardian Angels by Nicholas Harden, where all the characters were named after biblical angels and had roles in their group that matched up with their names. I thought that stood out as being interesting in this collection.
When it comes to characters and piggybacking off that, naming characters, that's something I pay a lot of attention to personally in my own stories. When picking names for characters, I like the names to be relevant to the characters or what they're doing. So yeah, that is definitely a good example. And it is a lot of fun when I see other authors do that.
With that story, I actually thought it was the one, like as I was reading, I'm like, oh, we're actually going to get a happy ending with this one. Oh wait, no we're not. Another story that I actually really enjoyed a lot was River City Nights. Dick Calloway as a character, the taxi driver, was just a poor bastard trying to do his day job and just roped into just every awful thing that you could imagine.
Oh, wholeheartedly agree with that, yes. And, you know, the unexpected consequences of him going through the story were... I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And,
oh, yeah. The desperate person you want to see to succeed.
Right. And and that ending line. I love the ending. The whole ending. Like, man, I wish we could spoil more on a podcast.
Now you just have me curious. Who's the author of that one again? River City Nights by Tana Simonis. And I apologize if I butchered your last name.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's an author we've not met in person, so we can't ask them, hey, how do we say your name?
Just because I don't remember the last line, because I read this collection a while ago. Oh. Yes. Yes.
River City Nights also had a very noir feel to it. I mean, noir anthology, stories have noir. I felt it had a very good noir feel to the story.
Mm-hmm.
So I also really like the characters in Fixer. The Fixer kind of being
Ms. Fixer.
Miss Fix, exactly. Yeah, not being a typical Fixer as you would think of in like a crime story, was done really well. I like that quite a lot. And when she dressed up as the plumber, that was great.
Yeah, I agree. She had a great voice throughout the entire thing, and it was that kind of character that you just were cheering for. It's almost that last day on the force type thing, and this is the last thing I get to do, and then I'm out. And it was very, very fun seeing how it worked and what happened. And I have feelings about how that story ends, and I'm not going further than that because spoilers.
Well, unfortunately, like I mentioned earlier, this whole not spoiling things with the podcast, I think is going to be one of the most difficult things for us here on UFR, honestly, because there's so many. It's like, oh, that ending was so good, but I can't really tell you about it.
I think that's going to be more difficult for me next proper episode, but we'll get there later.
One of the ways to really set a noir mood is to with the descriptions. What were some descriptions that stood out for you guys?
A lot of these stories are just laced with metaphor, and metaphor is really important in noir stories, so I like that quite a lot. I know I keep going back to it, but Muskrat Blues, the descriptions in that I really enjoyed. Even though it was one of the more graphic stories, the descriptions were very good. Really, the only thing I didn't like was maybe it gave a little bit too much away, because I thought the red herring was a little too obvious in it.
Speaking of descriptions of that story specifically, I think the sense of smell came through so strongly with that piece. It was really, really neat. So, Mog, to jump off yours, talking about graphic stories, one that really comes to my mind, especially when it comes to description, is Crimson on Copper by Tony Greyfox. The diesel punk story with so many just the visceral damage that the automatons had done to characters throughout that story were not stomach-turningly graphic, but still visceral and very, very intense. And the way that they were done and described, not just that, but also some like that final fight in that story, which I'm not saying anything beyond other than, wow, it's one of those, that story was one that I wasn't reading a story, I was watching a show.
And to piggyback off that, Huskar's action sequence in A Blacker Dog was really good. It was done really well. It pulled in, you could tell exactly what was going on. So we'd be remiss not to mention A Blacker Dog when it comes to description of action.
Oh heavens, yes, that last fight was intense.
Yeah, and there was another thing in Blacker Dog that really stood out for me, which was the description of the black dog eyes, or lack thereof.
Yes. Yes, and yes, some more, because wow, his eyes were terrifying.
Yeah, I agree. Very, very good description of his eyes.
One that I thought did descriptions really interestingly was Brooklyn, Blackie, and the Unappetizing Menu by Bill Kiefer. With that story, there was so much to unpack, but the drug experience, if you will, and how that was shown was so interesting. And the way it was, the drug impact was mapped out throughout the story. It's like, I'll admit, a little bit of it I was able to see early on. And the way that hints were dropped, I'm like, oh, this type of thing is going on. I didn't know where it was going with it, but it's still really, really neat with how it was done. And just like, oh, that fox is hot, and I want to do things to that fox. And no, I shouldn't. I'm on the job. Let's keep it moving.
We need a laugh track.
I mean, you could laugh. That's totally allowed. I promise. As long as you're not laughing at me, we're good.
You don't have one on the soundboard?
Don't tempt him, please, Lord, don't. The last story I want to touch on for description is actually Bullet Tooth Claw by Marshall L. Mosley. While I will say it felt a little bit more detective than noir, I still think a lot of the descriptions throughout were really, really interesting. The way that Marshall described the main character looking for clues in a very, very dog-like fashion was still neat and was very well done, especially the sights and smells. It really helped pull me into the story that much more, especially the closer to the end we got. What about language and dialogue? Did any stories stand out for y'all?
Definitely. I had one that stood out for me as I mentioned in setting. Scorned for me was a fantastic use of using language and dialogue to establish a setting. It very much set this in a slightly lower class, 1930s-ish world. Unfortunately for me personally, I felt it came on just a little bit too thick, to the point where I was kind of like, okay, it broke engagement a little bit for me as I was trying to figure out what a character was saying. However, that was my personal issue with it, and of course your mileage may vary. I think it was a great way to establish a setting through language and dialogue.
Actually, jumping off that, I think it's kind of funny. A great example of that exactly, because while it was almost a little off-putting for you, while yes, I found Maltese's dialogue to almost be jargony, it was still very, very noir. Like early on in the story, one back and forth that stood out to me is, you remember that classy Dame Ivory? Yeah, about yay high spotted fur and a rack you could rest wine on. Like that line right there, two different characters, two different lines. All of that was the descriptions and the dialogue these characters used felt so very period and story focused. It was fantastic in my opinion.
And me personally, going back, unfortunately mentioning a story that we've mentioned before, I really enjoyed the dialogue in A Blacker Dog. As we mentioned earlier, the dialogue between Hunter and John really helped tie everything in that story together. And like TJ mentioned, it's a relationship doesn't necessarily have to be romantic for there to be that really good bond, and we got to see that through the dialogue.
Actually, kind of like what I just mentioned with Kiri's Scorned, her dialogue almost sounding jargony. While I really, really liked the language that Husketeer used, reading this as an American with an American's lens, there were a few bits that it did almost trip me up a little bit, and it wasn't the British use, because Ocean uses, I think he actually defaulted to that as his dialect as well, which is totally fair and valid and editor choice. It was, I do remember at least once, if it wasn't for an episode of a TV series where 999 was mentioned, I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, you're talking about emergency response services. Okay, I'm still able to follow this, but it made me pause for half a second. And it just, again, it was still really, really neat. And it's always interesting to me to see to get other worldviews. It was a lot of fun going through the story with that.
Another story that I felt did dialogue really well was Every Breath Closer by Slipwolf. Slip always writes excellent dialogue, and I thought his use of action tags was also exceptionally well done in that story. So, Fixer also had really good dialogue. The interplay between the main character and her former lover.
Oh, yeah.
And especially at the end, and again, we can't talk about the end there, but just that last little bit where you don't want the thing to happen, but you see it's happening, and then the dialogue cuts off when it happens, and it's just, that really hammered it home.
You're hurting me, Mog. Why are you making me think about that scene?
Because it was good. Good story. So.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a very good story, very good plot. Stories and plots. That's kind of what this whole noir thing's about. Any particular noir stories and plots jump out at you guys?
As one that we kept mentioning throughout, Muskrat Blues by Giannis. This story was one of the most noir feeling to me. Just in general, everything that was going on, the wondering what was happening and how it was going to happen. It was really, really interesting and very well done, in my opinion.
Yeah, the grizzled old private eye that used to be a detective, that's like classic noir. Very good.
Yes, and most of them were, that type of plot where you have the private investigator trying to solve a mystery. Not that the mystery itself was always the important thing. Every Breath Closer, for me, was one of those in particular, although it may just have been me, because as we've said, that hit one of my phobia buttons pretty hard, and because of that, once the MacGuffin was introduced, I had basically figured out the mystery. But I feel in noir, the actual mystery itself isn't as important as, seeing how the character reacts to what's going on.
Something we've not mentioned, which is fairly important for noir settings and plots. What is a MacGuffin?
A MacGuffin is, to use a classic example of the Maltese Falcon, it's the thing people are looking for, usually, potentially. It's the thing that helps move the plot along.
One particular MacGuffin that stood out to me, and not related to the anthology, was the briefcase in Pulp Fiction. That's probably my favorite MacGuffin because we never find out what's in it, and it's not really important other than the fact that everyone wants the briefcase.
Mm-hmm. Another easy example just like that, the Maltese Falcon. It's the namesake of the film, but really we don't care about the Falcon itself. We care more about how everyone reacts to it and around it and the things they do for it.
Also one of the classic noir stories.
Kind of built the genre.
Oh, yeah. Another story, though, in this collection that I thought was really, really interesting, that had a fantastic story, was River City Nights. The way it starts off so mundane and normal and becomes anything but was so interesting and almost a roller coaster ride in and of itself.
Let's go back to TJ's favorite, Vermin's Vice. I thought that was another one that had a good story and plot where the information was laid out in such a way that you didn't really get what was happening until the end of the story.
I will say I was actually I thought it was curious having two main characters, the way that they split it between the rat that owns the bar and the mouse and the mouse. But still, the way it was done, it worked fantastically.
Well, there was actually quite a few stories in this that I feel did that really well. Again, I'm just going to go down the list and read the table of contents.
We've talked about a lot of story elements and kind of covered everything. As kind of a final thought, what were some things that we liked overall about it?
I really liked something. I'm going to say liked with air quotes because it deserves air quotes. The moral ambiguity of so many of these stories. In one sense, it almost became a hunt for me. It's partially why I liked Vermin's Vice so much. Seeing where that gray, that questioning of was that right or no, that wasn't, looking for that was almost fun in and of itself. And seeing where it came up in so many of these stories, sometimes it was right up front, other times it didn't happen until the very end. It was always unique seeing how each author had their own take on it.
Yeah, for me, the thing that I liked the most was this almost felt like a tutorial for noir. The whole anthology felt like it was answering the question, what is noir? And as something that I hadn't experienced a lot of, having it laid out with these examples, which were all good examples, I felt was really helpful. And I kind of wish I'd read a little bit more before making my own efforts at it.
I can agree with that. Looking at my own story, my Inhuman Acts 2 submission, I wish that I had had more exposure to noir before I attempted writing it. And that is definitely something that this anthology did well. It is a very good introduction to the genre with so many different settings and characters, written in so many different styles and ways, with, frankly, a lineup that's just pretty awesome. It's a very good lineup of authors in the table of contents. So overall, things I liked about it was the noir atmosphere that was pretty consistent throughout the entire anthology.
With that being said, do you have any warnings for the audience in regards to this collection?
So as mentioned when getting into some of the descriptions, there are some graphic stories. If that kind of thing puts you off, I mean, you're going to know with the very first story if this is going to be too much for you.
The first 16 pages are available on Amazon.com, which could give you a hint at what the level of graphicness is like. Another preview, if you will, can be found as Savin Drake does a reading of A Blacker Dog by Husketeer, which is available technically it's available on YouTube, but it can also be, a link to it can also be found through the Inhuman Acts product page at baddogbooks.com.
And I'd recommend you do that whether you buy the book or not. Which, don't get me wrong, I'm going to endorse this book. I think you should pick it up. Savin does really good readings, so I think if this interests you at all, you should check that out and actually listen to his reading.
Definitely check that out. It is something I did myself. I would also recommend this book. Probably my warning about it is that, as Ocean recommended to me, take a step back every now and again. Don't try to plow through it. And, if you need a break, take it. Because noir, it does tend to be on the dark and gritty side. The other reason for that would be because they do tend to stay very close to the trope of the private investigator. These stories can start to blend a little bit, even though they are all of such good quality. You may find yourself saying, which private eye was that again? But overall, yes, I definitely recommend this.
I think my warnings have been touched on already between you two. I agree, though, this anthology is a fantastic collection, especially if you've never read noir, and if you have any interest in the dark and gritty sort of feel, the questionable morals. I would certainly recommend this anthology collection to anyone who has an inkling of interest. Now, will it be for everyone? No. This collection will probably turn people off because I don't think there's a single happy ending. So, if that's not your thing, I might avoid this. If you can stomach that, yes, very much yes.
All right, and where do we find the book?
Yep, as we mentioned, you can find it at furplanet.com, at the Furplanet table, at your local furry con. And if you'd like it in ebook, you can get it at baddogbooks.com. It is also available in both forms on Amazon.
Awesome.
Yay, we made it.
So with that, I think we've survived our first review. Yay!
Yay. What should we do next, guys?
The answer to that is what we have planned next is another episode on this anthology, speaking with one author and the editor.
Okay, so next coming up, we actually have an interview with Husketeer, who is awesome, and the editor of this anthology, Ocean Tigrox, will be joining us for a tit-for-tat style interview. So we're interested to see what that actually entails. I assume that he wants to promote his own podcast using ours, because that's something we would never do.
Oh, no, never, ever.
Certainly never go on his.
Yeah, we would certainly never promote our podcast on Fangs and Fonts, so how rude of him.
But Teeth and Typefaces, we might storm that castle.
And in the meantime, you can find us on Twitter at UpForReview. We have a Telegram at UpForReview. Discord, UpForReview. Noticing a pattern here? And you can also email us at upforreview@gmail.com.
That's up for F-U-R, review. And what about us individually? Should we give out our credentials? What if these people actually tried to talk to us?
I mean, if we haven't scared you away yet, you can find me on Twitter at TJMind. That's MINDE.
You can find me on Twitter at JadenDrakis with no C, because I can't spell my own name.
And I'm on Twitter at Mog_K_Moogle.
And with that, we'll see you on air and in the table of contents.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bow, bow, bow.